Okay, Muslims always start off in God's name, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. And our normal greeting is Assalamu alaikum, which means peace be unto you. And many of you probably have heard that before. So today we're going to talk about the month of Ramadan and the Muslim devotional practices that are associated with this month. And my discussion is going to cover three related topics. Firstly, I want to give a general overview of Islam as a faith tradition. Secondly, we want to explain the Islamic lunar calendar. Next, we want to mention the history of the four sacred months, which exclude the month of Ramadan, which has a special sacredness all of its own. And lastly, we want to examine the significance of fasting as a required act of faith, the distinctive sanctity of Ramadan relative to the other 11 months, and the importance of the last 10 days of the month of Ramadan. Okay? And I hope I have enough time to do all of that. It's going to be kind of informal. And if I say something that you need some clarification for, it's okay to raise your hand and say, could you explain that? What does that word mean? I'm going to try to give you the English equivalents of any Arabic terms that I use. Since Muslims, regardless of their language backgrounds, utilize Arabic as I guess in a Christian context would be a liturgical language. And many of our phrases and terminology as we talk with each other are peppered with Arabic terms. And it sort of standardized the way that we communicate. So whether somebody speaks Farsi or Urdu or English or French or whatever, we can use Arabic terminology. And our prayers are also conducted in the Arabic language. That is our formal prayers. All right. The generic word Islam with a lowercase I is derived from an Arabic root which means both peace and surrender. Hence, Muslims frequently refer to their religion, Islam, with an uppercase I, as the peace which comes from surrendering to the will of God. In the Quran, the sacred scripture of Muslims, Islam defines itself as deen, an Arabic word, deen, or a way of living in conformity with the ordinances of God, which encompass both belief and appropriate behavior. Islam as deen, or a way of living, is based on two core concepts, Tawheed and Nubuwwah. Tawheed is concerned with the nature of God and refers to absolute, uncompromising monotheism. That is, God's unity and uniqueness as the creator and sustainer of the physical universe and the unseen realm, which is called al-ghaib in Arabic. And al-ghaib is important because normally as humans we experience existence through the physical universe and our senses. But there is also, in Islamic theology, an unseen dimension, and things are going on in the unseen dimension that relates to the physical dimension. To attribute divinity to anything or anyone else is an unpardonable transgression according to the Quran, unless repentance is sought afterwards. And that's what I meant by an uncompromising monotheism. God in Islamic theology has no partners. He is indivisible. He is incomparable to anything that we can imagine. And we only know him through the way that he describes himself. Nubuwwah, or prophethood, is concerned with the primary means by which God communicates with humankind. And it refers to prophethood, that is, the divine appointment of exemplary individuals to receive God's revelations and to transmit God's guidance to others. So that's our definition of prophethood. And it's a special definition. I know in English, in popular culture, we refer to people who are as prophets in a colloquial sense, that they foretell the future or they have some important message that has bearing on the future. But that's not what we mean in Islamic terminology by prophethood. We're talking about people who are specially appointed by God in order to convey a divine message. The first part of the Shahada, the Muslim declaration of faith, is to bear witness to Tawheed, as I just mentioned, or the oneness of God. The second part of the Shahada, or declaration of faith, is to bear witness to Nubuwah. So this concept of Nubuwah and Tawheed, as I said, are the core concepts of Islam. The second part of the Shahada is to bear witness to Nubuwah, especially to the prophethood of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. We have a practice, whenever we mention the name of Prophet Muhammad or any of the other prophets, we have to invoke blessings on them. So we normally, as Muslims, do it in Arabic, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So you'll hear me say that every time I mention Prophet Muhammad's name, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. All right. So the second part of the Shahada is to bear witness to Nubuwah, specifically to the prophethood of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and by extension to all previous prophets, including Noah, Abraham, Isaac, Ishmael, Joseph, Moses, Aaron, David, Solomon, Zechariah, John, and Jesus alayhi salam upon all of them. In Muslim sacred history, Adam is the first prophet, and Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam is the final prophet and the seal of prophethood. In other words, we believe that Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam ends prophethood, that there will be no more prophets after him. We don't demand that other people believe that. It's just part of our understanding, okay? All right. The Shahada, the declaration of faith, is one of 5 pillars of Islam as a way of living. And by pillar, I mean the thing that supports the entire superstructure of the religion. So the Shahada, or the declaration of faith, is one of 5 pillars. The other 4 pillars are Salat, which is ritual prayer 5 times a day. And ritual prayer means that the prayer is conducted in a certain way, and there are certain things that are recited in the prayer. The prayer is a whole body prayer, and you've probably seen this on TV. It involves standing, bowing, kneeling, prostrating, sitting, and standing. And each prayer has a certain number of cycles called a rakat. The next pillar is zakat, or payment of a charitable tax on one's excess wealth. Every person who accumulates excess wealth beyond their needs, there is a formula. It's generally 3.5%, but depending on what you own, the rate may be higher. And that money goes to specific categories of people, including poor and destitute. Next is sa'um, or fasting. From dawn until past sunset during the month of Ramadan. And we're in the middle of Ramadan right now, and I'm fasting, and there are at least 2 or 3 other Muslims in here. They are also fasting. And lastly, the Hajj, or the pilgrimage to Mecca in the Hijaz region of the Arabian Peninsula, at least once in a lifetime, to reenact the sacrifices of Prophet Abraham. So the Hajj, or pilgrimage to Mecca, is not about Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, but rather it's about the sacrifices of Prophet Abraham alaihi salam and his wife Hajar, or Hagar, and to some extent his son Ishmael. But those are the 5 pillars, and we are going to focus on the fast of Ramadan. These five pillars are the foundation upon which the rest of Islamic religious practice is constructed. Now, in addition to those 5 pillars, which are things that people do, acts, Islam has 6 basic articles of faith. Faith comes from the Arabic word iman, which means belief beyond a shadow of a doubt. So that's what we mean by faith. Not just belief in something, but intense confirmation, to be convinced. Islam has 6 basic articles of faith. Belief in God's oneness, which overlaps with the Shahada, or the declaration of faith. Belief in God's angels. Angels are servants of God that are free from any transgression or disobedience. We believe that the angels are perfect beings and they are created out of light. So belief in angels, belief in God's prophets, belief in belief in God's divine decree, meaning that God is the ultimate reality and everything that exists in creation is relative to him. And obviously, as all-knowing, all-seeing God, he is aware of everything that has been, that is going on, and that's going to be. He is aware of the movement of every atom in the universe. And lastly, belief in the resurrection and day of judgment. Sometimes people are surprised about that. They don't realize that Islam requires belief in an afterlife, and that as human beings, we all are in a state of return. From the time we are born, we are eventually going to go back to our origin, and that is to God himself. And we will be judged based on how we lived out our lives. Explaining the nature of faith, Iman, Prophet Muhammad ﷺ described it as a knowledge in the heart, a voicing with the tongue, and an activity with the limbs. Hence, religious practice and religious faith complement each other in Islam. And Muslims aspire for the highest state of God consciousness, known as ihsan, or doing what is beautiful. And that is interpreted to mean to worship God as if you see him, for if you do not see him, surely he sees you. So that is doing what is beautiful, because God is considered beauty and he loves that which is beautiful. That is beautiful human behavior. Now, let's get to the Islamic calendar. The Islamic calendar is purely a lunar calendar, and its 12 months are based on the cycles of the moon. Each month lasts for a full lunar cycle, which is the time span from the new moon phase until the next moon phase. Of course, the astronomical new moon is not visible, as this is the phase in which the dark side of the moon faces the earth. Hence, technically, each month of the Islamic calendar begins with the sighting of the new waxing crescent, shortly after sunset on the 29th or 30th day of the old month. So it's a traditional practice for Muslims to go out and look to see if they can spot the new crescent. And it usually appears, because the earth is spinning on its axis, it doesn't appear every place at the same time. So there is some zone of visibility where it first appears. And as the night moves from the east to the west, the crescent gets slightly larger in new zones. So for example, if it starts, say, in the eastern United States, it may be a thin sliver, but by the time it gets to Australia, it's a little bit larger and it's a little higher in the sky when the sun sets. But that determines a month. New crescent moon to new crescent moon. 29 or 30 days. Unlike other calendar systems that use intercalation, that is, adding leap days or leap months to synchronize the lunar year with the solar year, the Islamic calendar does not correlate with the four seasons that we experience in the temperate zones: spring, summer, fall, and winter, marked by equinoxes and solstices. So if you're familiar with elementary astronomy, in the winter and in the summer, the sun is at either its highest point and its lowest point. Those are the solstices. And in spring and fall, they are called equinoxes, and they mark the changing of the seasons. So tomorrow will be the first day of spring. So that'll be the spring equinox. Okay, but the Muslim calendar overlaps with the solar calendar, but it's not the same. And we don't add any extra days or extra months to make it coincide with the 12 months of the solar calendar. An Islamic year consistently falls about 11 days short of the solar calendar, and the months regress or move backwards through the seasons of the normative Gregorian calendar. So it takes about 33 years for the month of Ramadan to move backwards through the solar calendar through all the seasons. So I've been a Muslim for over 52 years. So I have fasted in every season. And for me, the worst is winter, because my skin gets very dry and my hands crack. And summer is not a problem for me because I get chilled when I'm fasting. So in fact, when I was working at Wofford in the summertime when I was fasting, I was working in air conditioning. I had to go outside and get warm because I was freezing. I was just freezing from the fasting. So I'm now in my second 33-year cycle. So hopefully if I live long enough, I will have gone through two 33-year cycles. That would have been 66 years. Now the origins of the Islamic calendar predate the religion itself, but are validated and confirmed by the Quran, the divine revelations that constitute the Muslim scripture. Two passages from the Quran are instructive in this regard. In the 10th chapter, verse 5, we read, "He it is who made the sun a radiance, and the moon a light, and determined for its stations, that you might know the number of years and the reckoning of time. God did not create these save in truth. He expounds the signs for a people who know." And in the ninth chapter, verse 36, we read, "Truly the number of months in the eyes of God is 12, laid down in the book of God the day he created the heavens and the earth. Of them 4 are sacred. That is the upright religion, so wrong not yourselves during them." These and other related verses specifically mention the role of the moon and its cycles for calculating the passage of time. Moreover, the verses authenticate 12 months in the year as a divinely ordained scheme, at least according to Islam. Although 4 sacred months are mentioned in the Quran, the names of these months are not stated, as they were already known by the inhabitants of the Arabian Peninsula before the rise of Islam. Nevertheless, Prophet Muhammad reiterated the sacred months and reminded his followers to observe their sanctity. 3 months are in succession, namely Dhul Qa'dah, Dhul Hijjah, and Muharram. They are respectively the 11th, 12th, and 1st months of the year. The 4th month is Rajab, and it is the 7th month. So there are 3 months in succession, 2 at the end of the year and 1 at the beginning of the year. And they are significant because, according to Muslim religious scholars, the 4 sacred months were historically associated with the prohibition of warfare and other hostilities in order to allow unimpeded travel for the performance of religious rites, particularly the Hajj and Umrah. Of course, the Hajj is the pilgrimage to Mecca, and Umrah is called the lesser pilgrimage, that is, a visit to the Kaaba at times outside of the Hajj season. So those months related to avoiding warfare to allow because the pilgrimage existed before the prophethood of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. We believe that the pilgrimage started with Prophet Abraham. He and his son Ishmael reconstructed the Kaaba on the spot where it was originally constructed by Adam. And then God instructed him to announce the pilgrimage. It was a barren valley. There was nothing there. And Abraham wondered, how is it going to be possible that I'm going to call people to a pilgrimage? And God said, don't worry about that. I'll make sure that the call reaches to people. So that today, millions of people go for the Hajj. I have been myself. It's mentally and physically taxing. And you prepare as if you're going to die and not come back. I had to make out a will, I had to pay off all of my debts, and I didn't know if I was going to make it back home or not. I was sick the whole time, but I endured and I finished it. All right. For contemporary Muslims, these months are special times to increase voluntary acts of worship and to perform a greater number of charitable deeds, especially giving money to the poor and feeding people. Conversely, these are also times to refrain from harming ourselves spiritually, as the Quran advises, by not transgressing against divine limits or violating the rights of other people. The hallowed status of the four sacred months does not mean that other Islamic months have no sanctity. Rather, each Islamic month has its own degree of sanctity and spiritual benefit. This is especially true for the month of Ramadan, the 9th lunar month, which holds a distinct honor over all the other months. Even though technically it is not one of the sacred months mentioned in the Quran, it has a distinct honor over all the other months, and we'll get to that shortly. However, the sacred months, as alluded in the Quran, were consecrated by God when He decreed the number of months in a year at the creation of the heavens and the earth. Just as God has chosen certain places for His sanctity, which we can call spatial sanctity, and that includes places like Mecca, Medina, Jerusalem, places that people considered sacred because of a particular prophet or the construction of a temple or some other sacred site. But just as God has chosen places for His sanctity, which are called spatial sanctity, He has chosen certain times for special blessings, which we call temporal sanctity. And that's what the four sacred months are. They are sanctified in certain time periods. Now, let us turn our attention specifically to the month of Ramadan and the devotional practices associated with it. The command to fast is found in verse 183 of the 2nd chapter of the Quran. O you who believe, fasting is prescribed to you as it was prescribed to those before you, that you may acquire God consciousness. Prescribed for you as it was prescribed before you. All of you are probably familiar with the fact that Jesus went into the desert and fasted for 40 days and 40 nights. And in many Christian denominations, especially in Eastern Orthodox, and I particularly like the Ethiopian Tawahida Church, fasting is really important. Among Ethiopian Orthodox Christians, they fast more than any other religious community on earth. I mean, more than half the year is devoted to fasting. It's slightly different from the fast that Muslims do, because we do a complete fast. But they fast from food and other activities for most of the year. And the priests in the Ethiopian Orthodox Church fast even more than the lay people. So, we are required to fast because it's prescribed for us as it was prescribed to those before us, so that we can acquire God consciousness. God consciousness is translated from the word taqwa in Arabic, which means God consciousness, but it also means piety, righteousness, and self-restraint. Fasting consists of abstaining from eating, drinking, and sexual activities from dawn to dusk, and exercise in physical, psychological, and spiritual discipline. It may seem like it's simple, but it's very demanding depending on where you live on the earth, whether you live in a desert, a mountain, or a tropical area. All of those impact how you feel during the fasting. And it also affects the amount of time. In the summertime, for example, here in the United States, if you live in, say, upstate New York, where the days are very long, or if you live in England, where the summer days are very long, you may fast for the sun may come up like 4 o'clock in the morning, and it may not go down to like 10 or 11 o'clock at night. I've been to England, and I wasn't fasting, but I've seen what it's like. So depending on the season of the year and where you're located on the earth, the length of time that you fast will vary. And that's why Ramadan, the month of Ramadan, rotates throughout the solar year, so that people living in certain parts of the world can experience both long days of fasting and short days of fasting, hot days of fasting and cold days of fasting. Okay, so that's why it's an exercise in physical, psychological, and spiritual discipline, especially in advanced industrial societies like the United States, where there is so much stuff going on around you. And if you have a job, you still have to work. I have had friends who did construction work, and they had to fast in the summer doing construction work. And you become adjusted. Your body adjusts after a few days. Okay. All Muslims who have reached the age of puberty are required to fast, although some categories of people are exempt. If the circumstances prevent fasting is temporary, a person is required to make up the missed days after the month of Ramadan is over, but before the next Ramadan starts. Should the circumstance be permanent or present for an extended amount of time, one may compensate by feeding a needy person for every day that's missed. So there is some latitude. Muslims are expected, Ramadan is a time of heightened attention to the rules of right conduct and ethical behavior. Muslims are expected to refrain from anger, violence, envy, greed, lust, gossip, and lying. All obscene and sinful stimuli are to be avoided. Every deed, whether good or bad, weighs heavier in the scales on the day of judgment when done during this month. Muslims are therefore encouraged to be extra vigilant about the purity of their intentions and the purity of their behavior throughout Ramadan. Intentions are important. We have a saying from our Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam that actions are judged by intentions. So even before we perform our prayers, we have to intend. You don't have to say it out loud, but you can. You have to intend to perform the prayers so that you are consciously doing it. Every day before fasting, we have to intend to do the fast so that you are aware that you are doing it. You not just start doing it, but you have to intend to do it. Today, an estimated 7 million American Muslims from a diverse swath of ethnicities and socioeconomic backgrounds represent a growing religious minority in the United States. Each subgroup, from African Americans to South Asian immigrants to newly resettled refugees from the Middle East, is defined by its own social and cultural history, and in many cases, its own worldview and theological interpretation of faith. Yet, fasting in the month of Ramadan weaves all of these subgroups together, along with more than 1 billion other Muslims worldwide under a common religious tradition. Ramadan is perhaps the most sacred time of the year for the Muslim community. According to Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, when the month of Ramadan starts, the gates of heaven are open and the gates of hell are closed and the devils are chained. Therefore, there is less of an influence for Muslims to do things that transgress the ordinance of God, because blessings are coming down from the heavens, because the gates are open, the gates of hell are closed, and the devils are chained. Devils, in Islam, there is the main devil called Satan, or Shaitan in Arabic, but there are lesser devils, his assistants who go about whispering and trying to cause people to do what is wrong. But they're all chained up during Ramadan. So their influence is still present, but they are not around to induce people to do what is wrong within Islamic theology. Before dawn each day, Muslims eat a pre-fast meal called suhoor. This is followed by Salat al-Fajr, or the obligatory dawn prayer, often performed in congregation at the mosque. And we have the morning prayer every day at our mosque here in Spartanburg. But Spartanburg actually has 2 mosques and an imam bar. We have 3 Muslim religious institutions. The one I attend to is the largest one. Not Spartanburg, but Spartanburg County, because one is in Inman, and our mosque is technically outside of the city limits, so they're all in the county. But we have, even though we lock our building, we have a code on the door so you can get in if you want to go in and make prayers during the middle of the day. After the pre-dawn meal, suhoor, we can perform the obligatory dawn prayer either individually or in congregation. After sunset, Muslims break the daily fast with water and dates. That's a practice that came from Prophet Muhammad, because dates were very common in the city Yathrib, or Medina, the oasis town where he established the first Muslim community. So dates were a common fruit. Personally, I don't really like dates that much, but I may eat them during Ramadan, but I prefer an apple, an orange, or if it's summertime, watermelon. That's my favorite to break the fast. But out of tradition, Muslims break the fast with water and dates or other simple foods. This is followed by Salat al-Maghrib, the obligatory sunset prayer, often performed in congregation at the mosque. The main evening meal called iftar is then served either at home or buffet style at the mosque. And at our mosque, we have iftar every day. But not everybody shows up for that. But on Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, that's when everybody comes. There's no room in the parking lot. And so that's a social aspect of the breaking of the fast. And that's important because it strengthens brotherhood and sisterhood. And so all over the country, people are breaking their fast in groups. Although you can do it at home and invite friends and other families to come and participate. And my mouth is dry, but I can't drink anything. Okay. Tarawih are special optional night prayers after the obligatory evening prayers, but these are only performed during the month of Ramadan. The entire Quran is recited in Tarawih, typically at the rate of 1/30th per night. So these prayers are done in cycles of 2. And there is a person usually who's called a Hafiz, or protector of the Quran, someone who has memorized the Quran from beginning to end. And they usually recite parts of the Quran during each of these cycles of prayer. and they complete 1/30 in a night, so that by the end of Ramadan, they have recited the entire Quran. And I might mention that recitation of the Quran is an important act of worship in Islam. And children are taught to recite from a very young age, so that by the time many children are teenagers, they have memorized the entire Quran. And they can be said to be a walking Quran, because they carry the Quran in their minds and in their hearts. Even for children who may not speak Arabic as their mother language, they can still memorize the entire Quran. And for the rest of us, we at least have to memorize portions of the Quran to be able to recite it in our prayers. I have a difficult time struggling with the Arabic language, so I have memorized only enough to recite my prayers, but I also know a number of phrases. And this gentleman up here teaches Arabic at Wofford College, so maybe one day I'll be able to take his course. But I have taken Arabic several times, and I just struggle with language. Some people are like that. Some people have facility, they can just pick up a language like that. And some polyglot, they can speak several languages. I have friends in Ghana who can speak 4 or 5 languages, but I can barely speak one. Although I'm familiar with French, I studied that in high school and college, and I'm familiar with Spanish. I had Spanish-speaking neighbors, so I studied Spanish at Spartanburg Community College, just so I could communicate with my neighbors. All right, so that's Taraweeh. Not all Muslims perform Taraweeh. Some Muslims hold other devotional gatherings for dhikrullah, or remembrance of God, remembering God, for offering him praise and thanks and humbly calling upon him for mercy and forgiveness. And these are usually what we call dhikr circles. They are circles of people sitting in a mosque or some other place, remembering God through special chantings and certain supplications. I have participated in those. And to be honest, I prefer those to Taraweeh, but because I'm the vice president of Islamic Society of Spartanburg, I go for Taraweeh. But I have traveled to other parts of the state to participate in dhikr or remembrance circles. The month of Ramadan is also the anniversary of the Quran. In verse 185 of the 2nd chapter, we read, in translation, the month of Ramadan is that wherein the Quran was sent down as guidance for mankind and clear proofs of the guidance and the criterion of right and wrong. I've added that. And whosoever is present, let him fast the month. And whosoever is sick or on a journey, then a number of other days. God desires ease for you. He does not desire hardship for you, so that you may complete the period and glorify God for having guided you, that perchance you may give thanks. So, the Quran was sent down in the month of Ramadan from the highest heaven, or the highest level of heaven. In Islam, there are 8 levels of heaven. Not heaven in this, well, what we consider the celestial realms. There are 8 of them. And the highest heaven is where God is. Not in a physical sense, but it's where his throne is. But the Quran was sent down to the lowest heaven. The lowest heaven is like to the earthly sphere, so that it could be given to Prophet Muhammad over 23 years by the angel Gabriel as revelations. So that's what's meant by sending down. According to Muslim sacred history, the Quran was sent down to the world on Laylatul Qadr, or the night of power. It happened on a specific night during the month of Ramadan, and we call that the night of power or the night of decrees. There are various ways to translate Laylatul Qadr. This night is considered to be the holiest night of the year, as it commemorates Prophet Muhammad receiving his first revelation from the angel Gabriel in the cave of Hira, where he retreated for solitude and meditation. This blessed event is generally understood to have occurred on an odd-numbered night during the last 10 days of Ramadan. We don't know exactly which night, so there is something called the search for Laylatul Qadr, in order for people to try to experience that blessed night. Regarding the night of power, the Quran devotes the 97th chapter, one of the short chapters, to its explication. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim, in translation. Indeed, we sent it down in the night of power. And what can make you know what the night of power is? The night of power is better than 1,000 months. The angels descend therein by permission of their Lord for every matter. Peace it is until the emergence of dawn. Emulating Prophet Muhammad, Muslims who are able spend the last 10 days of Ramadan in seclusion in the mosque. This practice is called itikaf, seclusion in the mosque. Others stay up all night in worship on the 5 odd nights, hoping to experience the night of power. According to some theologians, the night of power may be experienced differently by different people, and different people may experience it on different nights. There's no way to know whether or not you have captured the night of power. It's something that you simply search and strive to obtain by engaging in extra worship and staying up all night. All right. As the end of Ramadan approaches, all Muslims must pay a charitable donation known as Sadaqah al-Fitr. Sadaqah is the word for charity. Sadaqah al-Fitr. Traditionally, the amount of Sadaqah al-Fitr given by each person was an amount equivalent to 1 sa'ah of grain. Of course, back in the time, 1,500 years ago, people didn't have money for exchange the way we did. They bartered with material goods. A sa'i is an ancient measure of volume, and various religious scholars have struggled to interpret this amount in modern measurements. The most common view is that 1 sa'i is equivalent to about 2.5 kilograms or 5 pounds. Rather than grain, each individual Muslim family member, man or woman, adult or child, sick or healthy, old or young, rich or poor, is asked to give away this amount as a staple foodstuff. The head of the household is responsible for paying the total amount for the family and for any visitors that may be in the household. So I had 3 children, a spouse. They're all grown now with their own families, but I had to pay for everybody. And if I had any visitors in my household at the time, I had to pay for them too. And I would just throw in a little extra, say, for my mother, even though she was a Christian. For my mother, if when I was living in her household, and any other relatives who might be there. But the head of the household is responsible for paying the Sadaqah al-Fitr. The beneficiaries of Sadaqah al-Fitr are members of the Muslim community who do not have enough to feed themselves and their families. According to Islamic principles, Sadaqah al-Fitr can be delivered directly to individuals in need. In most communities, however, the local mosque may collect all of the food donations or a monetary equivalent, which most people do. They pay a monetary equivalent for distribution in the local community. However, some national Islamic charities accept cash donations, which are then used to purchase food for distributions in places suffering from famine or disasters. So yes, a lot of Muslims will give. I used to do this in the past. I would give my Sadaqah al-Fitr a larger amount than I was required to pay to an organization. I would choose one country. For example, it didn't have to be a predominantly Muslim country, but any place that Muslims are. I have chosen countries in West Africa, East Africa. I have chosen places in the Caribbean, but now I usually give it directly to someone. Often somebody who's in prison or somebody who I know is in need of food. When I give them the money, they should buy food with it. All right, coming to the end. Once the month of Ramadan concludes, the first day of the next month, Shawwal, begins a 3-day celebration called Eid al-Fitr, or Festival of the Fast Breaking. Muslims dress in their finest clothing and start the festivities with an Eid prayer service after sunrise on the first day of Eid. In the United States, the Eid prayer is often held in a large open field a convention hall, or a sports stadium in order to accommodate thousands of worshipers. The event is usually covered by the local news media, and for major cities, coverage may be broadcast nationally. One of the famous Eid prayers that's broadcast nationally, or rather is covered nationally, is in Minneapolis, where they have a very large Somali community. And they rent a football stadium, and the whole stadium field is filled with people. They do that in some other places as well. Here in Spartanburg, we have space in front of our mosque, and we just constructed a picnic shelter and a large patio, so we'll have a covered space this Eid. And often in the past, we've joined with the mosque in Greenville, and we've rented a convention center, but now in Greenville, to accommodate the crowds, they have maybe 3 Eid prayers, and some other mosques do that. Last Eid, I went to visit with one of my sons in Maryland, and the mosque that we went to had, oh gosh, all the mosques, the large ones, have 3 Eid prayers outside to accommodate the crowds. But in the past, I have gone to Charlotte. One year, there were like 15,000 people at Eid celebration. They've had it at one of the fairgrounds. They've had it at a convention center. And in the past, also, when my children were young, we used to go to Atlanta. And the Eid were held out in Grant Park. Thousands of Muslims. And now, there are so many Muslims in the greater Atlanta area that they have multiple Eid prayers. In Gwinnett County, they do it at the fairground there. In Atlanta, it may be done at Lakewood Fairground. And it's just, there are too many people to have one Eid prayer. I'm sure there are at least 50,000 people, maybe more. I don't know. The numbers have grown. And so it is with Greenville-Spartanburg area. At one time, I counted Muslims from at least 15 different countries. Now the number has grown to at least 20. That's the diversity that we have. In fact, last night, I met a brother who was from Tajikistan. It's like, oh my God, what are you doing here? But the upstate of South Carolina, because of the high employment, the large number of jobs, people from all over the country are moving here. So these Muslims aren't necessarily coming here from other countries. They are coming here from places like New York, Washington, Philadelphia, Chicago. And we see this increase in the population. Our masjid recently had to renovate our prayer area. We took down the wall between the prayer area and the multi-purpose room in order to accommodate. We have these portable rugs that we roll out because we just didn't have enough space. So that's it for Ramadan. And if you have any questions.
All right. So let's, if you would, let's say thank you.